Good afternoon. It's Thursday the 13th of December 2012. Welcome to UK Column Live. You'll be joining myself, Brian Gerrish, Mike Robinson, and our guest today, alongside me of course, is Ian Crane. So we've got a very full 2-hour show today. We're going to concentrate on what's happening in UK and overseas. We'll be bringing you the real news. And I think you're going to find it a particularly interesting programme today. The weather outside, as we always report, is particularly cold, overcast, not much wind, so we're a bit on the chilly side. And of course for you, Ian, that you've just come back from the sunnier side of the globe.
Indeed, yes.
You're feeling it a bit cold?
A bit cold, and I'm still adjusting to it being day when it's supposed to be night.
Yeah, okay. Well, if we have a look at what you got up to over there, and I'm going to point out for listeners only that we're showing a slide here of Ian in what looks like a very attractive location. This is New Zealand.
No, this is Australia.
Aussie TV, sorry. A very attractive location here because you're faced not only with tropical plants but also a particularly attractive young lady in a bikini.
Yes, indeed. This is Aussie Beach TV.
Right. Okay.
And I was invited to join Aussie Beach TV for a couple of hours one Sunday afternoon up on in Surfers Paradise on the Gold Coast. But what started out as a couple of hours actually turned into a whole afternoon. And the guys at Aussie Beach TV, they basically grilled me on a whole bunch of different aspects of my worldview, and basically over the next year they plan to stream those out in bite-sized chunks. And Aussie Beach TV is a web-based channel, but it also gets pumped into casinos and sports bars throughout Australia.
Right. So they've kept the whole thing fairly relaxed. This seems to me, from what I've looked to the short video clip, this is something that's targeted at younger people, is it?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Yeah. Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, while we were filming in the Gold Coast, it was Schoolies Week, which is the Australian equivalent of spring break, where all of the school leavers go and party for a week or two. Right. And in fact, one of the most interesting parts of the afternoon was when a group of young people, 17, 18-year-olds, had been standing around watching us filming. Right. And then in the break, one of the young lads came up and started speaking with me about 9/11. And then the camera guys realized that this would actually make some good TV. So they filmed that interview, and hopefully at some point in the not-too-distant future, that discussion with that young lad will actually be broadcast on Aussie Beach TV.
Right. Well, isn't it interesting that we're here into the subject of what the free media is doing now? So web-based TV, it's spreading around the globe. Just in a few words, what's your impression of the state of knowledge in Australia and New Zealand, if you're able to?
Unfortunately, as my good friend Max Egan says, the problem with Australia, he says, Ian, is our AAA rating. Unfortunately, he's not talking about the fiscal rating. He's talking about the what he calls the apathetic, alcoholic Australians. And of course, only an Australian could make that observation. Yeah. And the problem is that Australia is a bit of a party culture, and so everyone wants the good life. But the good news is that more and more people actually are waking up to what's occurring.
Right. So the point there is that they're warm, they're comfortable, as long as they can still have their Barbies and they've got the tinny on the side. That they're not watching what's happening politically. Unfortunately,
like Max himself would acknowledge, the Australian stereotype is certainly there for all to see. Yeah. But fortunately, and the fracking issue, which I know we're going to talk about a bit later, is actually serving to make people realise that there is a very pernicious agenda that is determined to undermine, literally and metaphorically, their way of life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're actually going to get on to fracking quite quickly, but what we thought we would do just before we did that was to say to people, well, here we've got the Daily Mail reporting that we're a nation of telly addicts, and the statistic is that the average Briton now spends about 4 hours glued to the screen. What we'd like to say is don't spend 4 hours a day glued to the main screen propaganda. but start to tune into the alternative media and what we are increasingly calling the free media. But you commented to me just before the programme started that basically 4 hours a day in Britain, and you quoted a figure for America.
It's over 8 hours in the US, but the difference being in the UK, I mean, I don't have TV, period. I just don't have it. I haven't watched TV in over 10 years in the UK. But the difference is that in the US, people have TVs on from the moment they wake up. I mean, you can always tell when people are moving about the house in the US because a TV goes on in the bedroom, then one goes on in the kitchen, and then one on the main room.
Yeah.
And they're often all on different channels. And of course, this is more pernicious than sitting down and actually watching it, because it's the subliminals that are going in when you're not actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
You know, the brain's in the alpha state.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're just going to say for viewers and listeners, please keep watching alternative media, and the more you research for yourselves, the better it is to dig out the truth.
I think that's a great point, Brian, because, I mean, very clearly the role of the mainstream media is literally to tell people what to think, you know, and not to put anything to any doubt. So they are literally saving people from the trouble of having to think for themselves. And of course, the role of the alternative media is completely the opposite.
Yeah.
Because we don't expect anybody to take what we say at face value. In fact, we'd be mortified if they did.
Yeah.
You know, what we're trying to do is to stimulate people's curiosity so they go and look at it for themselves.
Absolutely. And just perhaps one final comment on that. We had a visitor in our little office here in Plymouth yesterday who was talking about phoning up to say that he wasn't going to pay his BBC licence anymore because he wasn't watching TV. And he said it was extremely interesting, the reaction of the TV licensing people, because initially there was a sort of shock horror. Well, you can't possibly say you don't want to watch TV. And why? Can we ask why? And he said because of the propaganda, because of the lies. And he said you could hear the people cringing the other end. And this gentleman's view was that basically the people the other end had heard this argument before. So I think that people who are taking the brave step to say, no, we're not accepting this stuff pumped into our homes, the BBC licensing authority teams are starting to hear what people are talking about, which is
absolutely,
which is good, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, well, let's have a look at fracking. And I've got to say, I don't know a great deal about this. I've read some bits on what fracking and shale gas is about, but I have to say that I didn't get a warm feeling about it. But I know it's a subject you've been looking into in quite some detail, so tell us a bit about it.
Well, it's not a question of looking into it. This was my living.
It was your living, okay.
I regret to say that
Right.
when I was with a company called Schlumberger, and when I was with Schlumberger in North America, a massive part of our revenue came from fracking. And I've always had a concern about the whole fracking issue, primarily because when I was in the US and I was asking specific questions about the makeup of the cocktail of the fracking chemicals, and I was told, Ian, you know, that's not your concern. This is proprietary information. Your job is just to ensure that the stuff is pumped as per the job design.
Yeah.
And
so just to explain in simple terms for people who don't know, what is fracking? What's actually taking place?
Okay, fracking is actually the slang, the short, the abbreviated version of fracturing.
Right.
And in fact, it's only recently that a K has been added. It used to be, in the oil industry, it always used to be spelt FRAC apostrophe, you know,
Right.
and that was a frac. But now it's come into sort of common usage. It's FRACK, the fracking. What it is literally the fracturing of the geology. So when you have an oil-bearing or gas-bearing rock formation,
Right.
if you are having difficulty getting the oil or the gas, the hydrocarbons, to the wellhead, then basically what you've got to do is you've got to open up the rock strata so that you can create the channels for the gas or the liquid to get to the bottom of the well so that it can come up to the surface. And the way this is done, initially it was done by pumping phenomenal amounts of water under phenomenal pressure. But then over the years it became more and more, dare I say, sophisticated. and now approximately 2 to 3% of the mix that's pumped down the well is a chemical solution. And these chemicals perform a number of different tasks. I mean, they're accelerators, to reduce the friction as the liquid is pumped down the well. There's obviously acids in there to open out the rock formation, and then as the rock formation is split, then the gap is filled with sand or silica. The big problem with fracking, and I mean this has been the concern, all the way down the line. The big problem with fracking is that the oil industry will tell you it's safe because, of course, it's in their interest to do so. But in reality, it is proven to be anything but safe. And the problem being is that it doesn't matter how good the geologist is or how good the engineer is designing the well and designing the frack job, you actually cannot tell exactly how much of the rock will be fracked. And so in many cases, what you end up with is a situation where you open up the rock strata and you fracture literally into the water table.
Right.
And so consequently, the gases that are in the rock formation can escape into the water table, as can the chemicals that were used during the frack job.
And this is where I know there's some video clips on YouTube where you can see people in the States opening a tap and actually they can light.
Oh, absolutely. And this is exactly the case in Australia right now as well, where the coal seam gas, the methane, gets into the water supply, and then as you open the tap, of course, what's coming out is not just water, it's water plus gas.
Right.
And consequently, if you hold a naked flame to the tap, then you can set it alight. Yeah. And in fact, one of the guys in the US that has probably done the most to raise awareness of this is a young filmmaker by the name of Josh Fox. And I think his documentary was actually released about 18 months or so ago, and it's a film called Gasland. Right. And I would absolutely encourage people to Google Josh's film, Gasland. You'll find it on YouTube, and watch it from start to finish, because this is Josh's own journey after being offered about $100,000 by an oil company to gain access onto his property so that they could drill and then frack. And of course, being a fairly astute individual, he realized that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So he wanted to find out what was involved in this transaction. And so he started his journey across North America, looking at other areas of the States where the land had been fracked and the phenomenal damage that it's caused. I mean, in some parts of the US, the people that have lived on this land, I guess ever since their forefathers went across in the wagon trains into the Midwest, and basically the land is effectively uninhabitable because the water table has been poisoned. So consequently, they can't drink the water. Animals and livestock can't drink the water. The soil is effectively toxic, so it can't grow crops. And the only reason the people stay there is because they've got this generational attachment to the land. But the oil companies, without admitting any liability, but the oil companies effectively provide them with bottled water because, as I say, they don't admit liability, but the bottom line is, of course, that they know just as well as everybody else that they've destroyed that water table, and so they provide bottled water to the people who still live there.
So did you, I'll just take this point, Mike's keen to come in. Would you say that any of these risks have actually been brought up in government policy in UK? We're talking about implementing this stuff.
I believe in France, fracking is currently banned.
Right.
And in the UK, of course, we had a couple of frack jobs up in the northwest, which were run by a company called Quadrilla. And in the immediate aftermath of both of those frack jobs, there were minor earthquakes.
Right.
And so fracking was put on hold in the UK pending further investigation. But then, I think this article that you have from the Guardian actually follows a statement by Boris Johnson. Now, this is really absurd, because I think it was Boris making a statement at the weekend that basically to get the UK economy kick-started, we need to we need to take all of the restraints off of the hydrocarbon industry and start fracking the bejesus out of the country. The problem being is that in Australia, and one of the great ironies is that I was actually invited to go to Australia and specifically speak on the East Coast, up in the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast, by an anti-frack group called Lock the Gate. But when I arrived in Australia, the Lock the Gate group, the leadership of Lock the Gate group, mounted a campaign against me, publishing some outrageous libel and just downright lies. And effectively sent emails to all their members telling people not to go listen to what I had to say.
So this must have been a spoof group then set up?
It's controlled opposition, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, I have named the individuals. I met with some of the leaders of Lock the Gate, and to be honest, I can honestly say that I haven't met a more arrogant and willfully ignorant group of people. And they are totally, shall I say, controlled. And they are effectively supporting the Agenda 21. I mean, that's
right.
That's the nature of the beast, really. And so consequently, they're not interested in stopping fracking. What they are interested in doing is trying to corral the anti-fracking groups so that they are ineffective.
Yeah, control the opposition. Mike, what have you got?
Well, I just wanted to get a bit more from you about the earthquake issue, because on BBC Today programme a few days ago they were talking about fracking, and they were discussing the couple of earthquakes in the northwest, and the industry representative was basically saying, well, you know, the UK experiences similar scaled earthquakes several times a year. It's not that big a deal. So obviously we've talked about the contamination of groundwater, but what are the risks undermining foundations of buildings, for example, and particularly where this is happening close to built-up areas?
Well, I mean, this is it's a great unknown in many respects, because, I mean, of course, the industry argues that there's absolutely no connection whatsoever between the fracking operation and the earthquakes. It's just coincidental, according to the oil industry, according to Quadrilla, that the northwest of England had two fairly sizable earthquakes in the immediate aftermath of the two frack runs there. I mean, if we look at the sort of potential damage that an earthquake could cause, of course, I was in Christchurch just a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, maybe we'll talk about Christchurch in a different vein, because that wasn't caused by fracking. Although, very interestingly, John Keys, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, on 3 separate occasions referred to it as a man-made earthquake. Now, if it was once, you could say that was a bit of a slip, but he actually made that observation on 3 separate occasions. And of course, it should also be acknowledged that FEMA and Janet Napolitano was actually in Christchurch the day before the earthquake broke. But we look at the phenomenal damage of that earthquake, and I have to say, unless I'd experienced it for myself, I would never have believed how geopathic stress can affect us. I mean, I literally walked into one house that was a little bit damaged, but I mean, it wasn't sort of completely destroyed. And the moment I walked into it, the nausea just swept over me. I mean, this is geopathic stress, and it's remarkable. I mean, I had to get out of that particular building, and then once you're outside and and walk away from that particular area, it's not so bad. But we don't really know. This is the issue. So what's it going to take? Are we going to give the green light to fracking? And the reality is, it's not our generation that's going to pay the price. No, because it's a generation down the road. Now, people say, is it irreversible? Well, I don't think anything is irreversible, because the earth, just like the human body, seems to have a remarkable ability for self-healing. But to go into this project, which is all about short-term gain, right now, coal seam gas and the methane from shale, from various shale deposits around the world, is the new low-hanging fruit for the hydrocarbon industry. It's a lot cheaper to access the shale deposits than it is to go into deeper and deeper offshore waters. Yeah. So that's why, basically what we're going to see over the coming months and years is we're going to see the offshore drilling industry almost wind down, And what we're going to see is a real focus in areas where there are shale deposits. And in Europe, the biggest area of risk is the Loch Allen Basin in the middle of Ireland, because Ireland is now owned by the global corporatists. And the reason that, in my opinion, that they went for the jugular with Ireland is because they wanted to get hold of Ireland before the people of Ireland realised the enormous, the size of the enormous shale deposits in the centre of the country. And once this is unleashed, I mean, I was speaking to somebody a couple of days ago in Australia because they had taken their son to hospital because the son was suffering from nosebleeds and ear bleeds. And, you know, although, of course, the hydrocarbons industry denies any connection, it's remarkably coincident that these types of incidents occur in the immediate aftermath of major frack jobs.
Right. Yeah. Incredible. All right. Well, we're going to move on from that. Of course, anything that's being done on this scale is has got to be funded. Somebody somewhere is paying for it at the end of the day. So we thought we'd just move on to the subject of Deutsche Bank, which has always been of great interest to us, not only because of its immense power within Germany and the European Union, but also for some other reasons. But Mike, you spotted this one.
25 Deutsche Bank employees are in court today in Germany. So it's not just in the UK, it's not just Barclays, it's not just HSBC, but 25 employees have been arrested for money laundering. They have money laundering, obstruction of justice, and tax evasion. So Deutsche Bank, just as dirty as the rest. 500 police and tax inspectors raided Deutsche Bank yesterday, arresting 5 staff on the spot, including, it seems, some of Deutsche Bank's top management board members, Jürgen Fitchen and Stefan Kraus in particular. So we'll see how that turns out. But hopefully there'll be some prosecutions over that, unlike in this country.
Well, that was going to be my point, actually. It's very interesting, isn't it, that something has happened over there in Germany, but at the moment we just do not see any movement by the police in UK to look at the banking industry.
Well, the UK and the US and pretty much everywhere else in the world. It is incredible. And I think we may touch on it later, but of course in the US, the HSBC has just been fined $1.2 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, this is supposedly for money laundering. But the US Assistant Attorney General, a guy by the name of, I think it's Lanny Barbie, has stated categorically that they will not be seeking to bring any individual to justice.
Yeah.
They're working on the basis that this is systemic within the bank.
Yeah.
It's been going on for many years, and they're satisfied just to take their 1.2 billion, which is effectively a tax.
While we're talking on this, let me just see if I can do a bit of work and call that up, because we did pick that article up. We had it.
So
here
what this is once again is it's demonstrating that as far as justice is concerned, you can hide behind the corporate logo.
Yeah.
And this is the point that I was trying to make to some of the people who did come listen to what I had to say in Australia, is that just targeting companies isn't going to get you very far.
Yep.
You know, we've got to start actually identifying the individuals. So, for example, you know, if you're concerned about fracking, you've actually got to start focusing on the individuals within government and the individuals within those companies, i.e. the chief executive officer and the board members, who are effectively taking the decision to unleash this incredibly toxic cocktail of chemicals on the population. And it's, you know, it shouldn't be sufficient to say, oh, well, we were doing it under the banner of Metgasco or Shell or BP.
Yeah. Hiding
behind the corporate logo. I mean, people have got to be identified and serve notice that they will be held responsible.
Yeah, we've actually... Mike?
Well, it's exactly the same in politics in the States, because if you remember the congresswoman that was shot it must be a year ago now, and there were comments from John McCain and others at the time that really United States politics has to move away from targeting individuals and more target the institutions, right? So don't criticize individuals for what they do as individuals, but target what the Democratic Party does or what the Republican Party does. And it's the same kind of mentality. No individual is entitled to bear any responsibility for anything anymore. It's behind a corporate protection.
Whereas as a private citizen, you're out there fully exposed.
Right.
So the moment that you can get behind the logo of the corporation or the logo of a political party, you're safe.
So while you don't like to see somebody, never like to see somebody being physically attacked in any way, people must be culpable under the law and held to account as individuals.
Exactly.
We could be, what's the word, cynical, but with a purpose here, because of course isn't it interesting that Saul Alinsky's guidance on how you actually make change is to target individuals, make your argument personal, pin it on somebody. And Chief Mike, if you could just call, we've got that HSBC one there, just so people can see what we were talking about. So here it is, Glenn Greenwald, HSBC is the too big to jail poster child. Now, the poster child bit, I think, is simply saying that this is what you would splash all over the main billboards in America. We are too big to fail. You can't touch us.
Yeah. Well, we saw the same, of course, with Bob Diamond in the UK. I mean, he got moved out of his role of CEO. But he got a very, very healthy golden parachute and massive pension. So, the only thing these guys effectively suffer is, if you could call it that, is actually being relieved of their current responsibilities.
Yeah.
And we see it the same with BP. I mean, to this day, of course, I still maintain that the individual that should be focused upon is Bob Kaluza.
For the whole of that golf
Absolutely. I mean, because once Bob Kaluza is pulled in front of a hearing with that has the real desire to find out what truly occurred on the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, then we might make some headway.
Yeah.
But Bob Kaluza has pleaded the Fifth Amendment. He hasn't given any evidence whatsoever. And BP and Google have successfully managed to remove every single photograph of that individual from the web. And he was the guy put on the rig on April the 16th of 2010, in my opinion, to make it happen. And that's a statement that I have made persistently and consistently now ever since July of 2010, when I released the DVD on the subject. If I was wrong, of course, BP and Bob Kaluza should be suing me for libel, but they won't, because I might not be exactly right, but I'm too close. I'm too close for their comfort.
Yeah.
And so consequently, rather than draw attention to it, then they just simply choose to ignore it. But it is only by focusing on the individuals that we can really start to get to the root cause of some of these problems.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the subject to Deutsche Bank, we just couldn't resist going a little bit deeper, slightly different direction, but it's quite interesting because, of course, Deutsche Bank has been one of the biggest and longest funders of the political charity Common Purpose. So over recent weeks, we've had massive exposure in the mainstream press about Common Purpose people manipulating the whole of the events around Leveson. Deutsche Bank, so we've got a foreign bank is funding it. And I just thought we'd just have a look at a couple of letters here which just highlight that something is wrong in our political system. It's all right, Mike, we can have that one up again. This basically is a letter to a constituent dated the 3rd of April 2008. I'll read it very quickly. It's from Norman Baker MP. Thank you for your letter of the 15th of March regarding Common Purpose. Thank you also for the enclosed DVD, the contents of which I watched with interest. Although I agree that civil liberties and freedoms are of paramount importance in a democracy, I've been unable to find any conclusive evidence which suggests that Common Purpose is in any way infringing upon our civil liberties. And this is the gentleman, Norman Baker MP, and he's been described as a fearless investigator. And I just found it interesting to bring this into the bracket. A fearless investigator, totally unable to find anything wrong with Common Purpose, but the Daily Mail, with the Times, with the Telegraph, with the Sun, could point out that this organisation had been absolutely involved in manipulating the whole of the attack on the press and the subsequent Leveson inquiry. But these politicians don't seem to be able to see the wood for the trees.
Well, I would hazard a guess that Norman Baker probably didn't watch the DVD at all.
You don't mean to say he lied?
Well, I'm suggesting he probably got one of his staff to watch the DVD. Yeah. I mean, to be frank, I'd be amazed if he actually had the time to sort of sit down and watch it for an hour. But he probably got one of his team to watch it. And, in 2008, Common Purpose was, certainly operating in the hinterland, in the political hinterland. And he was probably simply advised that, no, there's nothing to worry about here. So, unfortunately, Norman Baker, let's take nothing away from the guy, because when it comes to the investigation into David Kelly's supposed suicide, this guy has been absolutely on point. But unfortunately, I would suggest that, with this particular issue, he probably has not put quite the same amount of effort in as he did with the David Kelly affair.
Well, as we work through the programme this afternoon, we're going to get in some fairly heavy material, and perhaps we should be saying to these MPs, it's time you actually started
absolutely
get off your... Are we allowed to say backsides on UK Column Live? I think we are. Get off your backsides and actually start to, see the wood for the trees, basically.
Well, unfortunately, the great tragedy is that, of course, in many cases, the MPs are literally just run ragged. They're chasing so many issues. This is the problem.
This is unbelievably mild of you, Ian.
Well, I am, but I'm not. But your point is absolutely valid, right. Because the thing is that they've actually got to recognise that they are being led, used and abused. Yeah. They're being led down the proverbial garden path. They're being given sort of projects to take care of which are totally meaningless and pointless to keep them away from the main issues. Yeah. And unfortunately, of course, many of the MPs are, well, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, but they're new MPs. This is their first term in office. And I know that many of them are totally frustrated at the way they have been treated in Westminster, because they feel that they're not being involved. They are simply meat. They are used as meat.
Can I use the phrase useful idiots? Because this is a common purpose phrase.
Exactly. I mean, they are meat to be used at the division bell. Yeah. And that's really starting to frustrate them, because what we're seeing is MPs who have gone into public service with the best of intention, with altruistic intent, after the debacle of the MP's expenses scandal in the run-up to the last election. And of course, they're beginning to realise that the whole thing is a total charade. Yeah. And they are simply there to make up the numbers at the division bell, and until such time as they prove themselves to be a safe pair of hands, they will be kept on the sidelines. And woe betide them if they have any particular area of expertise, because an MP from just up the road from here, Dr. Sarah Wollaston, she went into Parliament with the intention of helping to bring about health service reforms. And of course, she was told, you've got no chance. Yeah. You are not going to be involved in any committee associated with health service reforms because you've got too much of a vested interest.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just gonna push this thing a little bit, because we happen to have another letter here. This is from the Right Honourable. My goodness, how I hate that phrase. The Right Honourable Andrew Robotham MP, Minister for Defence Personnel, Welfare and Veterans. So this guy spent a bit of time in the army. I think he might have claimed to have been in the Special Forces as well. But so we would assume that this man, as an MP, knew what was what. He was also asked about Common Purpose. This was the 19th of January 2011. I'll read it out for listeners. Thank you for your letter to the Secretary of State of the 13th of November, asking about Common Purpose. Common Purpose is just one of a number of organisations used by the department to assist with staff development. They run a range of leadership development courses. They bring together people from a wide range of backgrounds. Participants from the private, voluntary and wider public sector are brought together and able to see at first hand how different organisations work together how their areas of responsibility can overlap and interconnect, and how effective leadership depends on having a broader perspective and better understanding of the people, places and organisations around them. Now, to me, that is absolute politically correct speak, and I think that paragraph has been stripped straight off the Common Purpose website and pasted into the letter. But note that they're talking about leadership, so this is creating future world leaders by this political charity, funded by a corrupt Deutsche Bank. Let's have a look at the man, let's personalise it. Here's Mr. Robertson. And of course, he didn't do his homework, or deliberately didn't do his homework, and so the exposure of Common Purpose escaped him. But I just wanted to show people this today, which is that we know at the moment that Common Purpose is an organisation which supposedly is selecting the best people and training them as leaders, but Common Purpose hasn't been able to run their own organisation properly, so they're having to take loans from trustees. And we now know, thanks to a very kind viewer, that Common Purpose has been charging other people in advance, and presumably this is to help prop up the balance sheet. And we also know that NatWest Bank is taking an interest in Common Purpose because of their increasingly perilous state. So people always shout evidence to us, so we might as well put some evidence on the screen. So this is an invoice between Common Purpose and Sheffield Hallam University. We'll highlight a bit of it for you. This is talking about a number of courses. So we just blow that up. Design delivery of 3 student leadership courses in November 2012. In addition, 3 workshops in December 2012. And we're talking big money here. We're talking nearly £60,000. And this is being paid in advance. And we are going to stick by our assessment of the situation, that Common Purpose can't look after itself. It's in financial trouble. And what's it doing? Sucking money out of the public purse. But these MPs are not bright enough to see this for themselves.
Absolutely. And like I said, I wouldn't be at all surprised if those well, they wouldn't admit it, but if they had simply had the letter thrust under their noses and put their signature on it. But yeah, what we are seeing here is, especially with Common Purpose working in the universities, Common Purpose is an organisation that has been set up to try and emulate Phi Beta Kappa in the US, and it's a very, very powerful US fraternity.
Right.
Everyone's heard of Skull and Bones, of course, thanks to George W. Bush and John Kerry, because in the 2004 US election we had 2 candidates, and both of whom were members of Skull and Bones, which is the fraternity that is unique to Yale.
Yeah.
So Skull and Bones has the ascendancy in terms of US, and it's the hidden hierarchy.
Yeah.
So your first loyalty is to Skull and Bones.
Yeah.
Harvard is also obviously a very, very important university in the US, and so Harvard has its version of Skull and Bones, and that's called Scroll and Keys. So we have the 2 foremost establishments of tertiary learning in the US, with unique fraternities, both of whom induct only 15 members each year.
Yeah.
So it's a limited number of people. There's about 1,000 people or so active at any time.
These are the future leaders. These are the elites.
And future and existing leaders, as we saw with George Bush and Kerry. But obviously there's a lot of good people in other universities around the US. And what they set up, in fact, in December 5th, 1781, I want to say. I might be wrong on the year, but I know it was December 5th.
Well, we'll say to people, check it
out, absolutely.
Yeah.
But Phi Beta Kappa is a very, very old fraternity that covers pretty much all of the major learning establishments in the US. And what it does, it identifies the best and the brightest, predominantly male, but if they identify a female that demonstrates the appropriate socio-psychopathic tendencies, and also sufficient levels of testosterone, then they are also inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. So a couple of the women, for example, who have been inducted into Phi Beta Kappa are Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice. But I can pretty much guarantee it doesn't matter what name you come up with in the US industrial, military, political complex, if they went to Yale, they will be Skull and Bones. If they went to Harvard, they will be Scroll and Keys. And if they went anywhere else, they will be Phi Beta Kappa.
Yeah.
And Common Purpose is trying to fill that gap in the UK and now, of course, overseas.
Absolutely. Well, if we've moved from Common Purpose UK to talking about overseas, we'll just have a look at this. And Mike, you flagged this one up, which was to do with the scars of war in Misrata.
So the BBC is reporting that in Misrata, which had suffered some pretty horrendous fighting during the so-called revolution, it's facing a crisis of psychiatric care, apparently, as former fighters traumatized by the conflict have been traumatized by the conflict. And so they're saying, there were 2,000 people died, 14,000 people injured during that campaign, and it's just interesting that in Libya now they're focusing on so-called mental health. But if we just look at the next one, then this is from Libya Herald from October, where they're highlighting that Misrata is one of the cities in Libya that Common Purpose has begun running its leadership courses. Yes. So I just wanted to say, if Misrata thinks it's got psychological problems now, give it another year or two once Common Purpose has had a chance to do its work.
Yeah, but it's the evidence is all in front of our eyes here. We've got this corrupt organisation which is interfering with free media, free speech in UK. It's put its network people in positions of power and influence, and they are clearly using disruptors to break down the traditional democratic structures in UK. And they haven't finished with UK yet. The country's nearly collapsed as a result, partly as a result of what they've been doing. But here they are now springing up in Libya. And presumably this is actually part of the regionalisation of Africa starting. So we're going to get rid of these nation states.
Well, and of course it's all part of Agenda 21.
Yeah.
It's all part of Maurice Strong's wet dream of communitarian collectivism. Yeah. And Common Purpose, I'm not sure whether it still has it on its website, but it actually used to state quite categorically that the purpose behind Common Purpose was to establish a network for the post-democratic era. So that the bottom line was it didn't matter who you had in office, in what form of government you had, it was ostensibly Common Purpose controlled.
Yeah, well, of course, Mandelson has used that phrase as well, post-democratic era, a big supporter of the Common Purpose Network. So we're just putting those two things together, but the link is Deutsche Bank, which has been a huge funder of Common Purpose, so a foreign bank funding a supposed charity which is acting politically and has now been revealed as an absolute snake, because a key target is to close down free speech in UK.
And we shouldn't be surprised, of course, at the relationship between a German bank and Common Purpose, because clearly what we see going on right now is ostensibly a German-centric EU.
Absolutely, which leads us on very nicely to David Cameron, who's been attending the Eurozone summit. I think this is another one that you spotted there, Mike. A very youthful-looking Mr. Cameron, I may say. I don't think this can be a recent picture, because I thought he's been looking particularly sort of pale and flaccid and a bit haggard over recent weeks.
Yeah, the Scotsman has him looking very relatively good, I suppose you could say, but
schoolboyish.
Yes, as good as it gets as far as he's concerned. Anyway, okay, so he's over in Europe at the moment pushing for tougher banking supervision for the Eurozone. The move will apparently take banking oversight out of the hands of national authorities and create an uber-European regulator. But what was fascinating was they were talking about this on the BBC this morning, and I don't apologise for listening to the BBC radio as I drive in the mornings, because it's amazing what you hear. And there was an absolutely fantastic quote from Sarah Montague, who's one of the Today programme presenters, and they were talking about this Eurozone. She was talking about Eurozone countries pooling sovereignty. Great. But the quote was, "We're going to see increasing integration in Europe. I mean, we know the blueprint is that they will eventually have a common treasury. They'll effectively be a federal government of Eurozone countries." So she is promoting European federalism. And clearly the BBC sees that as being a foregone conclusion.
Well, I was going to say maybe that's the key point, that here is the BBC that seems to know what the future holds. They know in advance what the future holds.
Well, what I find really incredible, of course, is that if we look at the outcome of the current attempt at a federal or federated Eurozone, of course we have so many countries on the point of collapse. Well, Greece is collapsed, Ireland is collapsed, Portugal's ostensibly collapsed, Spain is on the point of collapse, Italy's not too far behind, France is not in great shape, and we, the UK is outside of the Eurozone, but is literally teetering on the brink of a major precipice here. So it is absolutely absurd that the British broadcasting propaganda machine should be promoting the idea of a federated Europe with a common treasury.
Well, as if everything's okay.
As if everything's okay, exactly. It's absolutely unbelievable.
But the federal Europe's going to come riding to the rescue, and it's going to solve the problems for everybody. That's the key point. Destroy it all, and then we're all shouting for a solution. That's going to be the federal Europe.
Create a regime which creates the problem, and then you need more of the regime to solve the problems created.
Indeed.
Something like that.
That was very Sir Humphrey of you.
Well, we're getting better at this game. But it's very interesting that the BBC, I think, is becoming more and more fascinating as it becomes, to me, the arrogance is increasing daily. And one of the things is that the BBC seems to think that the average person in this country is a muppet, that they can't see through this nonsense.
Well, and of course, as we know from our own experience, and of course not least on Sunday, more and more people are starting to not only realise that things are not right, but they're actually starting to understand how the charade has been created. On Sunday, one example was that I asked, how many people in the room had heard the term fractional reserve banking, and everybody put their hand up. Everybody, without any hesitation. 5 years ago, it might have been a quarter of the room. And then, of course, I asked the question. I said, okay, so how many people could actually come up to the front and give a 5-minute explanation on fractional reserve banking? Now, this time, there's about a quarter of the room put their hand up. Now, that's a tremendous step forward. Because 4 or 5 years ago it would have been nobody at all, and hopefully by the end of Sunday, everybody in that room could put their hand up and say they've got at least a basic understanding of fractional reserve banking. And once people actually understand the magnitude of the fraud and the deceit that has been perpetrated upon them by the banksters and their compliant politicians, then people will start to go, hang on a second. And I think this is the issue. And of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski, a couple of years ago, made the observation. He said that the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. Yeah,
which we would say is starting to happen.
Absolutely.
And we hope we're assisting that. So we go from Cameron's boyish, well-fed, smiling face to a rather serious subject of benefit reform for disabled people.
Okay, so this is an article in today's Belfast Telegraph simply stating that hundreds of thousands of disabled people will see their benefits axed or cut in the next 3 years. It's not saying hundreds of thousands of benefits cheats. It's not saying hundreds of thousands of people who are actually fit for work. It's saying hundreds of thousands of disabled people. We know what's been going on with the assessments of the long-term sick and disabled. We know that disabled people are now being pushed onto workfare and similar programs of effectively forced labour. this is just another attack at the most vulnerable sections of our community, along with children and old people on death pathways. Now we've got disabled people having their sustenance taken away from them. So, where does this end? It's a fairly obvious answer to that question. It was rhetorical, but
unless we do something about it, which is exactly what we are going to do. And the key answer to this is that we have to replace the present people we've got in Westminster. I mean, I'm sympathetic to what you've said, Ian, that there are a lot of these people who are newcomers, they're green, they don't understand the system, but they need to wake up pretty quickly. And it seems to me that we've got to get into the parliamentary system genuine, honest, trustworthy people with some intelligence if we're going to flick the switch on this.
Well, I think we've also got to start actually making a little bit more effort to target our MPs and make sure they understand that there are an increasing number of people who are, as Zbigniew Brzezinski said, awakening to the political realities.
Yeah.
And in my my local MP almost 2 years ago held a town hall meeting, which she'd obviously been put up to try to get the local community to participate in the discussion of areas where money could be saved. But it was very evident that she knew absolutely nothing about macroeconomics. And when I asked her to just give us a quick rundown of fractional reserve banking, she actually went into a state of absolute apoplexy. And we've got to hold these people to account, and we've got to make sure that they do understand that there are an increasing number of people amongst their constituents who will not tolerate somebody being in office who's literally the division bell meat. Yeah, we want people in there who are going to stand up and make a difference.
Absolutely, Mike.
Right, just wanted to add one more thing about that article. I'll just put it up again quickly. It was Esther McVeigh was telling the House of Commons that by reforming the system, ensuring that it's fit for the 21st century, we can use the money we spend on disabled people more efficiently and effectively to help those most in need. And then she went on to say, by October 2015, we will have reassessed 560,000 claimants. Of those, 160,000 will get a reduced award, and 170,000 will get no award. However, 230,000 will get the same or more support. Now, I would like to know, before the assessment has been done, how does she know that? How does she know those figures? Those figures, to me, look like targets.
Yeah.
And it looks to me like whichever private company gets the job of assessing disabled people, those are the targets by which their contract will be assessed. Yeah. And that is fairly disgraceful.
Well, in today's Sun, in page 2, we have 6 in 10 to lose disability dosh. And there's the observation that there were 1.1 million disability claimants in 1992 and 3.2 million disability claimants in 2012. Well, I would say there's a few things that have probably contributed quite significantly to that. Not least is the phenomenal drop in the quality of food in the food chain. I mean, in the space of that 20 years, I mean, the amount of GM contaminated food in our food chain has risen dramatically. The amount of money spent on pharmaceuticals, the number of people who are now basically addicted to pharmaceuticals. Just
put this in context, Ian, if I got it right. What you're actually saying is that we're being made sick.
Absolutely, without any question. And you were right in your earlier observation, because if we extrapolate this through another 20 years, then where we are heading here is towards an agenda of euthanasia.
Well, Agenda 21, in fact, which is reduce the population.
To 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, as stated in Tablets of Stone. Yeah. Indeed. So we can see, if we look at what's happened over the past 20 years and extrapolate that forward, and we look at the increasing manipulation towards things like care pathways, which of course effectively means the death pathway. And we can see that ultimately what the global corporatists want are simply able-bodied slaves.
Workers, yeah.
And anybody who basically can't do their 80 hours, whatever it is, a week, slave labour, then they will effectively be culled.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. I passed a young lady talking to a friend at the weekend just gone, and she was saying, do you know I've worked over 80 hours this week? I am shattered. I can't do it next week. So here was this young lady obviously talking about her working life, and that was the figure she was talking about. She'd worked 80 hours. And of course we've got the smiling face of Ed Miliband. So Ed Miliband from the great Marxist family. So his training, of course, is you're a Marxist leader, so you're going to be well fed and you're going to live in your fat, opulent house. Meanwhile, the rest of the people are going to be serfs.
Well, and also on the... by the way, I just have to make the observation that on top of that page, on top of the page, if you can see it here, is some pictures of number 11 Downing Street. That's a residence of George Osborne, of course, and 4 trolley loads of beer and wine being hauled in for the Christmas parties.
Yeah.
So this is the political classes celebrating, whilst the rest of the nation sort of...
And it was Tony Blair saying that he was working to create an elite who would be appointed, not elected. So we've pointed this out well before.
So on the front page of the Eye today, the biggest fall in jobless for a decade. And of course, this is just outrageous, because the only reason that we're able to apparently release a fall in the jobless figures is because now if somebody is working for just 8 hours in a week, they are no longer regarded as jobless. Yeah. So we have this crazy situation where you've got people literally working 8 hours because that's all they can get. And in most cases, we have people earning minimum wage, because the other statistic that doesn't get bandied around is that in the UK today, we have more people, both as an absolute number and as a percentage of the workforce, we have more people just earning minimum wage than at any time since records began. Yeah. And of course there's multiple reasons for this, but a big part of it is immigration. And what is completely absurd, of course, is that whilst we've got rising unemployment and, more importantly, underemployment, we've nonetheless got the doors open and the country being flooded with more and more people who will take jobs at minimum wage.
Yeah, and of course the thing I'm going to point out here is that if you go into the Midlands and you talk to established immigrant communities, they share exactly the same concerns, that they've got children who can't get jobs, and what they see is more and more people coming in. So this is not a colour issue, it's not a religion issue. This is common sense. The work isn't there. The infrastructure can't cope.
It affects everybody that was effectively born here or has the right of residence here. But the other disturbing part of this, of course, is that we see this increasing gap between those earning the minimum wage at the sharp end and the elite, the chief executive officer, the board, and the senior managers earning outrageous salaries. Yeah. I mean, some of these salaries are obscene. We've only got to go back 30 years, to a situation when the differential between the chief executive officer and the guy working on the shop floor was at the absolute most, normally on average, something in the region of about 8 to 1. Today it can be 20, 30 to 1.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike?
Well, I endorse everything that Ian said, absolutely bang on the money, but the thing that has really killed me over the last day or two as they've been talking about these absolutely amazing jobless figures that they've been talking about, amazing, that totally unable to understand the rhetoric in the media is that they can't understand, that economists can't understand why in a falling economy we've got rising employment. And this is the rhetoric that they're using. We can't understand why this is happening. And I'm thinking to myself, if you can't understand why this is happening, then that explains why we're in this mess, really.
Exactly.
So, the mainstream media have absolutely failed to get to grips with this issue. Nobody is discussing the things that Ian has just said and that we've been saying over the last couple of weeks on this issue. the mainstream media is pushing this idea that that the jobless figures are really great for the economy. It's fantastic that the UK job market is bucking the trend. They're just lying through their teeth constantly, and that needs to stop.
Absolutely. Okay, well, what I'm going to say is just like us to move on through a few items. So let's cover a bit of ground, because we've got some interesting material to get to towards the end of the programme. But a little bit of trouble starting with the Chinese and the Japanese.
Well, this has been going on for a while now. There's some islands between Japan and China that have suddenly become an issue, apparently. And it just seems to be another destabilization in the world. So the Chinese have now invaded Japan's airspace for the first time since Japan started keeping records on this, which I believe was 1958. And the Japanese were scrambling F-15 fighters to go and check the situation out. I mean, it really wasn't anything terribly serious yesterday, but it was another provocation on this issue, which has been going on now for a number of months. Yeah. And it seems quite dangerous.
I haven't seen this reported on mainstream news at all. I don't know whether I'm correct on that or not, but I certainly have all the information I'm looking at. Well, we've watched that. The other, of course, topic which we remain extremely interested in is Syria. And as usual, Russia today is posing the questions that we're not seeing asked in Western mainstream media. So they're suggesting here, Mike, that an opposition victory could be possible.
Yeah, Russia is finally acknowledging that the opposition is getting support. Perhaps Assad is on a losing wicket here, but we have to wait and see, because particularly we need to wait and see what Russia does as things progress. But Russia's saying the fighting will become ever more intense, and Syria will lose tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of civilians. If such a price for the removal of the president seems acceptable to you, what can we do? We, of course, consider it to be absolutely unacceptable. So Russia's still supporting Assad, quite rightly, in my opinion, and criticizing as much as they can the Western powers that are financing these terrorist organizations. And what isn't in this particular RT article, but yesterday we mentioned on yesterday's news that the US has formally recognized the Syrian opposition, but that at the same time Obama has prescribed one of the opposition groups, the Al-Qaeda, it's the Al-Nusra Front for the People of the Levant, which is considered to be an Al-Qaeda front. Well, Obama's just had a message back from the Syrian opposition saying, oh no, you cannot single us out like that. We are all Al-Qaeda. Effectively, this is what's being sent back to him. So, we have now had confirmation from the Syrian opposition themselves that he cannot single out any particular section within the opposition as being Al-Qaeda and exclude others, that they all consider themselves of a similar ilk. These are the groups that we're financing, and we're paying our taxes to a government which is helping these organisations exist.
Well, let's name the names, because of course we're accusing David Cameron in particular of helping to stoke up the violence in Syria.
And William Hague.
And William Hague, absolutely. And of course we can also introduce this story, and I don't know whether there's been any developments over the last few hours, but of course we've had a lady Ukrainian journalist who's been kidnapped by the Syrian rebels. They threatened to kill her. We've got a better photograph here. And I believe that the deadline for payment of a $50 million ransom or $35 million huge ransom was today, but I haven't heard any news.
Well, I haven't heard an update on this, but she is due to be killed today unless the ransom is paid. And this is the caliber of the organisations that our government is supporting.
But Mr. Cameron and William Hague and the rest of the Tory party.
Well, just like supporting the Libyan opposition, of course, who murdered Gaddafi, and effectively also murdered Saddam Hussein. Let's make no pretense about it. I mean, the reality is here, this is the global corporatists. The whole idea here is to bring Syria into the global corporatist fold, just like Libya, just like Iraq.
Yeah.
And if they get their way, obviously, soon to be Iran as well. This has nothing at all to do with Assad, of course, his father before him. Many regard it as a totalitarian regime, whatever that might mean, because from where I'm sitting, we're sitting more or less in a totalitarian regime here.
Yeah.
And all the associated risks that go with that.
Yeah.
This is about the global corporatists getting their hands on prime real estate. Damascus, one of the oldest cities in the modern era.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it's the oil resources that they want up around the Euphrates, up around the center of the oil industry in Syria, is in a place called Deir ez-Zor, which I'm very familiar with. And that's what they want, and then they want to be able to run pipelines, down through Syria, and also, of course, to remove the apparent threat to the Rothschild Zionist state of Israel.
Yeah, which we'll be discussing a little bit later. So we'll leave you with we're going to leave our thoughts with this young lady, and we certainly hope that this has a happy conclusion.
Well, if it doesn't, then it's basically Cameron, Haig, and the US administration who have her blood on their hands.
Absolutely. I was going to say exactly the same thing, but I think this is where we need to be real in our reporting. Is somebody responsible for what's happening in Syria and the deaths and the murders going on? Absolutely. And that is David Cameron and William Hague. They've got to take responsibility.
Well, and let's also not forget that William Hague became increasingly vocal in terms of his support for the opposition in Syria after it was revealed that a certain set of photographs had been acquired by the News of the World. It was actually admitted during the Leveson inquiry that the News of the World had been instructed to acquire a set of potentially embarrassing photographs featuring no less than Mr. Hague. But those photographs were never published.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, well, on the subject of the news, the media, the press and control, quite an interesting article from the Telegraph today about a Mr. James Harding. And we've watched this one with great interest. What's your thoughts, Mike?
Well, James Harding was the editor of the Times, and he has been asked by the board of the Times. It says in the Telegraph article here that he resigned on Wednesday as a result, at the request of the board. So, in other words, he didn't resign at all; he was sacked. But he has been given a £1.3 million payoff, and the reason that's been given for him being asked to leave is that Mr. Murdoch was unhappy at the way that the newspaper had covered the News of the World phone hacking scandal. But it seems to be going hand in hand with the desire by News Corp to merge the Times and the Sunday Times, which apparently was something that they promised that they would not do. And so they're actually going cap in hand and asking the government, can we please merge these two titles, because actually they probably won't survive on the long term unless they are merged. So I guess what they're looking at is merging the two titles and then sacking half their staff.
Right, but any clues as to what Murdoch would be unhappy with the reporting? What do you think he might have been upset about? Because I don't know.
No, I have no idea. I know you'll agree with this, but this looks to me like the first scalp from Leveson.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm wrong.
No, well, we'll watch it with interest. Have you got any comments on that? If not, we'll move on. Well, the subject that I know locally a lot of people are talking about is the sad death of the nurse in connection with the royal family and time in hospital. So the Telegraph here was reporting that this nurse was found hanging. But really what people are saying is, what on earth has gone on here? We've got a prank, which has resulted, first of all, in the police saying they'd found somebody unconscious, then they were dead. Now it's turning out to be a suicide. And I'm going to say on a very serious note, the fact this lady has hanged herself, to me, is significant, because what we're seeing across the country is more and more people, particularly younger people, hanging themselves. She wasn't even the person who gave the detailed medical information. She was only the person who passed the phone call across. And of course, her family have been saying that from the time that they were told that unfortunately she was dead, they were not being given any information. And then we see Mr. Keith Vaz pop up. He does not appear on my list of honourable and honest people, or in my opinion, but all of a sudden he's there and he's looking after the family. What's your take on what's going on?
I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that the whole thing is extremely suspicious.
Yeah.
And at our event on Sunday, in the opening address, I just sort of did a straw poll and just asked the audience how many people had some concerns about the veracity of the reports that were appearing in the mainstream media about the alleged suicide of this young lady. And to a person, everybody put their hand up. There is something not right about this. Look, it was a prank. It was a practical joke. You know, what are we doing? Are we moving into a society where basically you just have to be a humorless clone?
Yes.
Well, of course, the answer to that is yes. That's exactly what they want. But the reality is, let's get a bit of sanity back in here. This was a prank, you know, and in fact, you know, the two Australians should obviously be feeling some remorse about what occurred. But are they responsible for her death? Absolutely not. I mean, first of all, as you rightly said, she wasn't even the person who shared the information. She was simply the person manning the switchboard who put the call through. The hospital weren't apparently considering taking any disciplinary action, and neither should they. In fact, what the hospital should be doing, of course, is reviewing its own internal procedures, because if there was some concern about who was or wasn't on the phone, then obviously they should have had some kind of code word for, you know. So there's a whole bunch of things that the hospital needs to be taking a look at here. But there's a lot of unknowns here, of course, and as you rightly observed, you know, we are seeing a phenomenal increase in suicides. And this is not just unique to the UK, it's right across the whole of the developed world. Much of it is attributed to the phenomenal uptake in psychoactives, SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, otherwise known as antidepressants, or even drugs like Ritalin, you know, amphetamines effectively. Yeah. But with drugs being sort of pushed out like Smarties, we have no idea about this lady's you know, potential well-being here, not just her physical well-being, but her mental state of health. Yeah. She was away from home, she was living away from the family. You know, we have no idea what other sort of pressures were going on in her life, or whether or not she did actually commit suicide, because I have to say that the timing of this death is incredibly convenient for Mr. Leveson, who of course just happened to be in Australia.
It is unbelievable. I think it is unbelievable that Leveson runs away from his own report. He doesn't want to answer questions. He goes straight to a booking in Melbourne, and then we have an incident which comes through the Australian media. And what is Leveson doing now? He's screaming for greater controls of the internet. He's not even actually linking things up in a coherent way.
Because this had nothing to do with the internet.
Well, this had nothing to do with the internet. This is to do with two people picking a phone up. So maybe Mr. Leveson wants all phones shut down in his logic. But what is the chance that Leveson goes to Australia, an event happens with the Australian media, and then who is Leveson? He's a judge. I mean, this is something that fascinates me, is he is selected, presumably...
Actually, he looks like Keith Vaz's brother.
Well, maybe. But we've got Leveson, who's selected through the Old Boy Network around Cameron. They're all QCs or barristers anyway. And this man is supposedly of an intellect that he alone can tell the nation state how they should control the press and the media. The arrogance is unbelievable, but now he can mince his way out to Melbourne And now he can do the same thing in Australia. He can tell the Australians what they should be doing with their press and media.
Well, I would say that the chances of all this happening sort of in random, of Leveson being in Sydney, giving his talk in Sydney, talking about the need to control the alternative media, the internet, at the exact same time as this event unfolds, is about as coincidental as FEMA turning up in New York on the morning of September the 10th, 24 hours before the events of 9/11, and Janet Napolitano and FEMA being in Christchurch 24 hours before the Christchurch earthquake, and Giuliani being in London 24 hours before the London bombings. There are no such things as coincidences.
On that scale, no, absolutely. So we are going to stay on the line that our condolences go out to the family. We know from individuals close to the family that the family are definitely not happy with what has happened around this tragic event, and we are going to keep digging, and we hope other people who are watching the programme, listening to what you're talking about, please can we start to see what the truth is here, because our view is that something very dirty has gone on. A gentleman who's been speaking out on this, shown here from the Scotsman, is Mr. Morrissey. And he's been quite outspoken, and refreshing to see it being published as well. So he has come out and questioned whether the Duchess of Cambridge was even ill at all. He's said that he's accusing her of not feeling no shame over the nurse's death. What he said was, there is no blame so far placed at Kate Middleton, who is in the hospital, as far as I can see, for absolutely no reason. She feels no shame about the death of this woman. She's saying nothing about the death of this poor woman. The arrogance of the British royals is absolutely staggering. And then he goes on to say, does she have a health condition? Is it anorexia or is it pregnancy? Yeah, well, what a very interesting question.
Well, or has she realised what she's got herself into? I mean, is she having a Diana moment?
Yeah, we don't know. But what we can show is that here we've got the Mail article, which is talking about the Australian media watchdog launching an inquiry into pregnant Kate phone hoax on nurse who was found dead. So here we go with it all starting to happen in Australia. And I think we should apologise to the Australians for inflicting more corrupt British global interference on the Australians. But what exactly is Leveson doing in Australia, and what actually is his remit? I think he's acting outside his authority. And that, of course, is what common purpose trained people to do. So he doesn't really care what the rules are. He's making his own rules as he goes along.
Well, he's in good company there with Julia Gillard.
Yeah. Well, we've got more trouble in the press, of course, because we've had newspaper editors, the Telegraph in particular, threatened because they started to ask questions about expenses to do with Maria Miller. Just got a picture here of the Tony Gallagher, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, and the other gentleman, Craig Oliver, who's part of the government's team. But essentially where it's all been going wrong is that the newspapers have been daring to ask questions about this woman and her parliamentary expenses. And of course, we're now virtually in the lib-lab-con dictatorship, and if you ask the wrong questions of people in this elite club, you get threatened. And the article essentially is that the Telegraph is reporting we asked questions about her expenses, and what the government did is warned us off, saying, well, you better be careful about this woman because she's a key contributor to the Leveson inquiry. So, I mean, it's getting more and more blatant that these people in Westminster really do believe that they're above the law.
Well, you know, one of the things I hope comes out of this is that you know, the readership of the mainstream media is dropping like a stone.
Yeah.
You know, and they're finding it more and more difficult to attract advertisers. You know, because they know that people are turning away from TV and from the newspapers, and you know, let this be perhaps the abject lesson. Either the mainstream media starts actually reporting the truth or it's just going to disappear and become totally insignificant. You know, the Daily Mail, I have to make the acknowledgement, the Daily Mail over recent weeks and months has actually sort of been running a series of articles that a few years ago would have been dismissed as rampant conspiracy. So, you know, maybe we're seeing, you know, Paul Dacker at least have a bit of courage and start reporting what's really going on. But unless the others follow, they're gone in a few years.
Well, as we say when we are in communication with the mainstream press, that basically journalists, investigative journalists in particular, have a habit of dying or disappearing in dictatorships. And it doesn't matter whether the dictatorship is Britain 2012 or East Germany. The press and the media are in for trouble if they allow these very dangerous people in Parliament to inflict censorship of the press. Because the moment the free press has gone, of course, they can do what they like, disappear who they like. So it's not just going to be it's not going to be threats. If we move on to a bit of local news, we're in Plymouth. The Evening Standard we've picked up on here, but many of the other papers have carried the story of a Royal Navy petty officer who's been jailed for spying offences. Quite an interesting story. He was apparently upset at treatment that he'd received in the Royal Navy, and he eventually thought that he'd made contact with people from the Russian embassy and was going to hand over code material. If you read the story, it's confusing in several areas as to what the exact truth is, but we are led to believe that this man was trying to get hand over high-grade codes, but he was intercepted by MI5 and MI6. And I find this a fascinating story because we know at the moment in senior government positions, both as MPs in Westminster and within the civil service, our security forces are absolutely ignoring the fact that we have Marxists, we have supposedly ex-communists, we have communist sympathisers working within the system, and they are untouched. And of course it was Jack Straw who was the man when he was in power that ensured that about 250,000 records of subversives in Britain were destroyed, presumably to hide the trail to his colleagues.
Well, his own was amongst them, I'm sure.
Well, of course, yes. I believe he did have a record for some unpleasant action when he was a student. What I wanted to highlight here is that the Navy petty officer gets sent to prison. Meanwhile, Oliver Letwin, MP, who was discovered dumping secret papers in bins in one of the London parks, was, of course, nothing happened.
Well, I wonder why. I wonder what his allegiance was.
Well, I just thought I'd flag up in contrast to the poor petty officer that when we talk about Mr. Letwin, he was getting rid of letters to the Intelligence and Security Committee. One letter suggested that the committee failed to get to the truth on UK involvement in extraordinary rendition. That actually means transport to torture. The secret transporting of terror suspects around the world for interrogation, that is torture. So he was busy dumping those in a public waste bin, but there was also other sensitive material, that means classified material, relating to Al-Qaeda and links to Pakistan, MI5 and MI6. So if you are an overpaid Tory politician and you breach the Official Secrets Act, and that's what it seems to me he was doing, you know, simply getting rid of classified papers, nothing happens to you. But if you're a serving petty officer and you get involved in that sort of...
Well, now, call it a hunch, but I'd say that he wasn't just getting rid of those papers. He was actually depositing them in bins in London parks. I mean, you know, this is George Smiley, John le Carrier, low-grade stuff. I mean, you'd think that Letwin could actually, you know, up the odds a bit.
Isn't that called a dead letter drop?
Something like that, yeah.
Well, he actually said that the papers were weighing him down. He felt the need to get rid of them because they were weighing him down. But I just point out the contrast.
Literally or metaphorically? Yeah.
Both. Staying with local subjects, this is an article from the Plymouth Herald from a couple of days ago, actually, but it was pointing out that Plymouth was to lose another 600 Royal Navy jobs. Plymouth, of course, has been a fleet base for many, many years, both surface ships and submarines. But in this bizarre article, they're discussing the fact that the Navy is going to be moving more men and at least 3 submarines north of the border to Faslane, so that the exact time that David Cameron and his team have stoked up with Alex Salmond the move to independence for Scotland, we're now starting to move yet more military equipment north of the border. Now, either this is because when the Scottish National Party take over in a state of independence and declare Scotland a non-nuclear base, those assets will be impounded and Britain will be left effectively without nuclear assets, which we believe is the plan for the European military situation. Britain is to be stripped of an independent nuclear capability. But on a pure economic sense, this is madness, that we've got a situation of total instability. We've got Plymouth, which is becoming a third-rate city on a visible basis, with shops closing and charity shops springing up everywhere. And now we're moving yet more equipment north of the border. But let's see what the local MPs say. So this is Labour MP for Plymouth Moorview, Alison Seebeck, and she said, well, we've known about the shift in submarines for some years, and that was always going to involve Royal Navy personnel moving away from Plymouth and up the Clyde. That's not something that hasn't been factored into discussions around the Navy base. So that's Alison Seebeck. She's Labour, of course. And meanwhile, her Conservative opposite, Oliver Colville, has said there should be no surprise in this, but he argued that any preparations for moving the submarine should be put on hold until the outcome of the referendum on Scottish independence. So between these two MPs, what we can see is a complete shambles. And I think I'm correct in saying that Alison Seebeck wrote a letter to a constituent in which she said that one of the greatest problems amongst her constituents was battery hens. It may have been another...
You see what I mean about keeping MPs bogged down in minutiae and trivia? Exactly.
Right. Well, we wanted to do a little bit of crowing here because a few years ago the UK column had been warning about the shutdown of Devonport Naval Base, and we'd also been warning about the fact that the Royal Navy was to be integrated with the French. And if you can read it, this is a skit on our new aircraft carrier. And in the forward bridge, we've got the British officer of the watch saying, "Where are the damn French?" And in the second following bridge, a Frenchman is saying, "Monsieur, monsieur, we're right behind you." But really what we're pointing out is that the integration of British and French armed forces is not being done on a partnership arrangement. This is to integrate command and control structures so that we are subsumed into a European military organisation.
Well, and just a couple of observations, Brian. I understand that the whole of the UK military is actually being stood down over Christmas.
Well, a big chunk of it, I believe.
Big chunk, yeah. So,
well, our prediction several years ago was that the British Army was going to be reduced down to 80,000 men and then lower, which simply meant it was a defence force. We're now starting to see those levels materialise, and I believe that the cross-party dictatorship, so that's the Lib Lab Con, are getting extremely nervous about the fact that so many people in the armed forces are waking up to what they're doing.
Yep.
And we know for a fact that troops out in Afghanistan are watching your programs, our programs, are the free press, and they're now starting to work out what's really going on.
Look, the reality is that there is only intended to be one militia,
Yep.
and that is the private militia of the global corporatists. You know, whether they wear a badge on their arm that says that they're part of the US
Yep.
military or NATO or whatever, it's meaningless, because in reality they are simply the private militia of the global corporatists.
Yep.
And anything else is superfluous to requirements.
Yeah. And who? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, this is the model of the British East India Company, which
Right.
had a larger standing order. A larger standing armour. army at the end of the 18th century, for example, and the early part of the 19th century than Britain did.
Yeah.
So we are watching our armed forces being absolutely coldly, callously used.
Neutered. Yeah,
Well,
used
and neutered.
Yeah. By the way, just one before you rush on to that.
I've just launched a helicopter there. Just put it on quickly because it was the end of this sequence. But this was just ramming the point home that here we've got cross-deck operations with the British Royal Navy Lynx landing on a French frigate. We've also had joint paratroop operations. And of course, the key bit is that if they can get the command and control structures between the Army, the RAF, and the Navy, if they can get those mixed in with the French, you can't unpick it. Who's in control of the units? How does all the signalling work? So what they're doing is taking control of British Armed Forces by getting inside, and then it's a common purpose penetration method. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to make the observation about the Scots, because one of the things that made me smile over the past week or so was the observation that if Scotland became independent, it would have to reapply for membership of the EU.
Yeah.
And it was being presented as though that was a negative. I mean, as far as I can see it, that alone should be a prima facie reason for every single citizen or resident living north of the border to vote for Scottish independence. Because part one should be to extricate itself from the European Union, and the second part, of course, should be to start issuing its own currency. It should absolutely take a leaf out of the Icelandic book, and it should. I mean, almost it could. I'm not suggesting it should, but it could deliberately collapse the existing economy. Although one might argue that's already been done with the collapse of RBS a few years ago. And take control of their own money supply, emulate Iceland, and of course what is not very well known is North Dakota, because North Dakota is a state within the US that operates outside of the Federal Reserve System. And because of this, it is the only state in North America that isn't bankrupt.
Right, well, I never knew that. We'll have to come on to some of that topic. But
well, hopefully the Scots will do a little bit of... Any Scots watching this, go and do a bit of research about North Dakota and Iceland, because that should be your economic model, and free yourself from the Rothschilds' bondage.
In London.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, maybe I'm being a little bit conspiratorial or cynical here, but I actually, when they announced that Scotland would have to reapply for EU membership, I immediately thought that is a very unlikely scenario at the end of the day, that perhaps this is a bit of a psychological operation going on the Scottish people, because if they vote for independence, they're going to get out of the EU. We know that everybody wants out of the EU, really. So I think they're trying to push for a positive vote by pretending that they'll actually be able to leave the EU at that point.
Yeah, maybe. Well, that's why they won't hold a vote in the UK, of course, because they know very well what the result would be.
Yeah.
Unless they manipulate it, but they wouldn't do that, would they?
Well, they probably would. We'd just end on the Armed Forces Ministry of Defence with this gentleman, Bernard Gray, who ran up a £23,000 hotel bill, and you pay, well, we pay for everything, of course, but for me, we see these cases on and on and on and on. People in what used to be the civil service who were there to serve, and they've now been made fat cats. Why have they been made fat cats? Because they can be bought and controlled. So,
did you say Minister of Defence there? I thought you said War Department for a second.
We had an agreement that we were going to replace the Ministry of Defence with what is now the British War Department from 2012, and we're smiling, but it's quite true.
And this is outrageous, because what makes this one? It's very apparent that this guy did not want to be at home. For whatever reason, I'm not casting any aspersions, but he did not want to be at home because he lived halfway between London and Bristol.
Yeah.
So barely 60 miles. He was certainly not even an hour away from probably his office in London or his office in Bristol. And yet, he specifically elects, supposedly, to take hotel accommodation at 23,000. Now, this is absurd. This is corruption, in its
but we've
most
seen
obvious form.
In all the big cities in UK, we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing chief executives of councils running huge credit card bills, paying for all sorts of things. And I'm going to say my belief is, and I'm sure we're right over this, the attack on British society, a key part of it is to breed fraud and corruption. Because you bring in the fraud and corruption, you are automatically starting.
Well, once there's snouts in the trough, and I mean the other thing is this guy had access to an official car. He had a chauffeur.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have got the train. I mean, this is just outrageous. And is the guy being called to account? Of course not.
No, protected, because if you protect him, he's a servant for the people who are pulling the purse.
And we need to. I mean, this is fortunately the mainstream media have highlighted this, and thanks again to the Daily Mail. But, we also need the alternative media to pick up on this and ram it home.
Okay. Well, we've covered HSBC, so I'm going to jump through that one. But, of course, the other thing going on in the background at the moment, supposedly, is the Jimmy Savile affair. And the Independent here reporting that the investigations are starting to move towards allegations concerning senior politicians. And I think this is getting very, very interesting as to how big a cover-up we're going to see, because really I'm not seeing any substance that the police are serious about getting in amongst the paedophiles who are clearly in Westminster and higher positions.
Well, Brian, even members of the police are very concerned.
Correct.
Because Operation Yewtree is a specific task force. And normally when an operation sort of suddenly finds that its case workload has increased dramatically, apparently the normal practice is to put out a call for volunteers to come forward to join the squad.
Right.
The people, the police officers, the senior police officers running Operation Yewtree have not sought to increase the manpower in the team at all.
Yeah.
So this absolutely underlines what you're saying, is that the motivation here would certainly seem to be questionable, and it's almost like they're going to pay lip service to it and then try and bury it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, well, I think they'll sacrifice all of the celebrities, because they're easy to do. You're a pop star, you work for the BBC, they're going to go for you, but they're going to protect Lord this, Lady that, because there's women involved in this stuff as well. But you're absolutely right. It has been quite incredible what police officers have been prepared to say about the massive cover-ups of paedophile rings by the police over the years. And I've personally heard this from a number of officers. Many of them feel very bitter about it because, of course, they know that ultimately senior police officers are not only protecting paedophile rings, but presumably they've been involved with them.
Well, of course, one of the speakers on Sunday at our event in London actually shared that he had registered a formal complaint with the police against a very senior British politician who had previously requested that his name be removed from online articles reporting his indiscretion, claiming that it was a case of mistaken identity.
Yeah.
But the particular speaker concerned has stated categorically that there was no mistaken identity, because he was actually introduced by name. Yeah. And then during the course of the evening, he was duly fondled.
Yeah.
So that's now a formal complaint with the Metropolitan Police. This guy is a very, very senior politician, and I'm sure that in the scheme of things, he thinks he's very well protected.
Well, he probably is very well protected, but I find it interesting that there's an absolute silence on this matter from the mainstream press. I know that the BBC have been tracking it. I know that the Mail's been tracking it. I know the Evening Standard's been tracking it, and other mainstream media, Sky News, I believe, is another one. There was some talk that a police file had been opened a couple of days ago, but absolute silence in the mainstream media. Yep. And this, to me, fits the pattern that you'll sacrifice, as I say, people who are the stars, the media people, particularly if it's history, but there's going to be a massive cover-up to,
Well,
to
of course,
protect politicians.
Ben Fellows is the speaker I'm referring to, and he also shared during the course of his presentation on Sunday that he had received a phone call from an advisor to Leveson, who called him and warned him and said, you are going to be the poster boy.
Yeah.
To Ben Fellows, this is, you are going to be the poster boy.
The whipping boy.
The whipping boy for bringing down the blogosphere.
Yeah. So you don't reward or you don't protect and encourage and support the whistleblowers. What happens is the threat comes in,
Yeah.
which of course mirrors exactly what was done to the Telegraph.
Exactly.
So we'll cover more on that. Now we've got a couple of sort of economic-y things to cover and some health ones. This is to do with Twinkie Chief Executive, which you picked up on, and I'm just going to move things on a bit because we want to get towards the end of these.
Okay, so very quickly, I mean, this is once again it's a classic illustration of the socio-psychopathic mentality of people operating in the corporate arena. I mean, this is a company that was going to all the companies called Hostess, manufacturers of the Twinkie bar, very famous in the US. The chief executive officer and the board knew the company was failing. They knew the company was about to go into receivership, but they raided the employees' pension fund to pay the executive bonuses. I mean, these are the sort of crimes that we need to make sure are exposed, and people need to understand.
To be punished, basically.
Absolutely.
Mike?
Well, I would just remind everybody that this is exactly what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did when they raided the state pension pot of £2.5 trillion pounds and the public sector pension pot of another £2.5 trillion pounds, while the British government was also heading its way to bankruptcy. So exactly the same situation, same mentality, all psychopaths, a lot of them.
Absolutely.
Okay, and health, child health safety. This is to do with covering up of information to do with vaccines, which I think you've got a strong interest in.
Well, I mean, this whole issue is one that I've been on the sort of quest with for quite a few years now, and it's all related again to Agenda 21, to the Codex Alimentarius agenda, to the quest to sort of completely eradicate all natural health products from the market, and also to abolish all natural farming. And this is very significant because earlier this year, in fact, a paper was published by a courageous doctor. You got it on there?
Yeah, we can bring this up on screen. I think this is the paragraph.
Do you want to read it, Brian?
Well, what the paper said was effectively that deliberately concealing information from parents for the sole purpose of getting them to comply with an official vaccination schedule could be considered as a form of ethical violation or misconduct. Official documents obtained from the UK Department of Health and the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation reveal that the British health authorities have been engaging in such practice for the last 30 years, apparently for the sole purpose of protecting the national vaccination programme. What they're saying is people have been lying.
Absolutely. No surprise here. And the reality is that, of course, the vast majority of people in the front line, the nurses, they genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing by encouraging parents to vaccinate their children. But of course they're not particularly well informed, and they're certainly not well advised. And what is happening fortunately within the UK right now is, as the average age at which women have their first child is increasing for a number of reasons, but with women having their first child over the age of 30, the more mature parent is better informed, and consequently more and more people are refusing to have their children vaccinated. Yeah. Now, I'm not advocating that people simply refuse the vaccinations, but I absolutely would encourage all parents to do their own research and in particular look at this document, which actually shows that for 30 years there has been an agenda to effectively conceal the truth from the general public.
Yeah, as to the dangers of vaccines.
Exactly.
Basically. And of course on the health issue, on the subject of cancer, this is the story we have reported on Sally Roberts, 37, from Devon, who ran away with her son because she was concerned about radiotherapy being given to him. And I know you've been following this this story?
Well, a number of reasons. I mean, Sally is originally from New Zealand, and of course, one of the reasons that I was in New Zealand was because I do publish a couple of magazines that are edited in New Zealand. One of which is the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine, and Sally is effectively the archetype of what I was just talking about, the mature parent. Sally's in her she's in her late 30s now. Tragically, her son Neon had a brain tumour. But Sally did her own research and decided that she did not want to subject her son to radiotherapy and that she wanted to try alternative methods. And what has been outrageous for me is the way that the British media has persistently used the tagline that Sally is withholding life-saving treatment from her son, where there are alternatives. There's many, many alternatives. And in fact, some of those are discussed in that document we've just referred to. But hopefully Sally is actually going to be on your show next week, Brian.
Okay, that would be good. Yeah, we're waiting for confirmation on that. And this one is really part of this. So from Waking Times, which is talking about the secret history of the war on cancer. So there are many people at the moment who are beginning to look into cancer and the claims on treatment, and particularly the official claims on cancer. And of course, it's an extraordinary disease where the state has legislated to prevent people from actually working to find cures.
Well, and it's actually illegal in the UK. For example, it's illegal in the UK for a doctor to advise a patient, whether they're suffering from cancer or not, but to advise a patient that nutrition may actually help prevent cancers or even actually cure cancers. There is only one accepted orthodoxy, and that is effectively chemo. And anybody who suggests anything else actually runs the risk of being jailed. And in fact, there are some people in jail because they have claimed that they can offer alternatives to chemo.
And we have to point out that when a small seminar on alternative care for cancer was run in Totnes in Devon, I've got to say that the local Tory MP,
Dr. Sarah Wollaston,
was very active in closing that event down. So there are two things going on. There's the political agenda going on, and there's also the closed minds of people who've actually been trained by a system which teaches them there's only one way to deal with these things.
And I mean, we do see a phenomenal increase in cancers, and we can look at a number of things that have occurred as the cancers have increased. I mean, there's a considerable degree of evidence to suggest that exposure to hydrocarbons, for example, can enhance the likelihood of contracting some kind of cancer. And if we look at the use of hydrocarbons through the 20th century, we see the rise in cancers. We've got the rise in GM foods, we've got the rise in things like aspartame. We've got pharmaceutical
food additives,
etc., etc. I mean, there's so many potential underlying reasons. I mean, the bottom line is, look, the war is on humanity. There is a war on humanity, and basically the whole idea is to get people sick. And the pharmaceutical industry has a very, very simple business model, and that is that every human life form is a revenue stream, potential revenue stream, from the moment of conception to the moment of death.
Yeah. Just hold up your Natural Medicine magazine there so that people can see that. So if you're interested in that, there it is. You can always contact Ian direct or us, and we'll tell you how to get hold of it.
Yep, or the website is nznaturalmed.co.uk. It is published as the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine because the Codex Alimentarius agenda would actually make it very difficult to publish if I said it was the British Journal of Natural Medicine.
Okay. Well, we're going to jump across something very different. This is the Telegraph that's been reporting on Israel's rival leaders and how they compare. And it's flagging up this lady, a lawyer who's apparently also been a one-time Mossad spy, former Israeli general. She's very interesting in that she was apparently born in Iran. I'm not sure how you pronounce her first name. Levini is her second name, I believe. But just an extraordinary background if you read what the Telegraph is saying about this woman. There are some extraordinary stories on the internet saying that she's been involved in sex plots. Now, whether this is properly factual or not, we don't know, but certainly there's a lot of conjecture on her. And if we dig into it deeper, we see here that Prime Minister Gordon Brown was expressing his regret over a warrant. This is when there was talk about Israelis who'd been involved in dubious intelligence activities, including allegedly the murder of people, that they were actually going to be arrested in Britain. And here's Gordon Brown, according to Levini's office, saying that Brown also promised to seek legislative changes to ensure that no Israeli official would risk arrest while on British soil. And she's saying the situation must be repaired immediately. So we're in this extraordinary situation where we have a nation state, which appears to be Israel, that thinks that it can act with impunity on British soil.
Well, it doesn't just restrict itself to British soil, of course, because in the first instance, in fact, I gave a presentation in California a couple of years ago where I raised the whole issue of the number of dual passport holders in the US administration. But in Australia, when Kevin Rudd was unceremoniously dumped from office, having lost his battle against Julia Gillard, well, I believe that Rudd was set up for a number of reasons, but there is no doubt in my mind that a contributory factor to Rudd being removed from office was because he carpeted the Israeli ambassador to Australia. Because do you remember the Mossad assassination squad that went into Dubai to eliminate one of their enemies? And well, they went into Dubai on Australian passports. So Kevin Rudd, being the man he was, but he didn't delegate the responsibility to ripping into the Israeli ambassador. He called the Israeli ambassador to his office and let it be known in no uncertain terms his displeasure at the Israelis using Australian passports to do the dirty work. And of course, a few months later,
bang, he's
gone.
Well, we were just going to... We've had a number of people contacting us, and they're clearly interested in some of this business of what is really going on at Westminster. And we thought we'd just take a look at Conservative Friends of Israel, which is an extraordinary lobbying group which is interwoven into the Tory party. And our point here is we're coming at it from an angle of who is our government involved with. It doesn't really matter whether it was to be Italy, Germany, Israel, or some other. We're talking about a foreign power, and we have British politicians intimately linked with their lobbying interests. Sorry, the previous one, I just jumped back, is the front cover from an edition of Conservative Friends of Israel. Obviously, Cameron's smiling face on the front cover. But if we go inside, we start to see a steady stream of Conservative, and indeed there are Labour MPs involved as well. So here's Francis Maud, and he's waxing lyrical on how wonderful Conservative Friends of Israel are. But if we look at it in a bit more detail, this is one of the inside pages. First of all, we've got Dr. Liam Fox, and here's part of his quote in the magazine: "The United Kingdom will always be a supporter of Israel. I can assure you that when the Conservatives return to office, we will remember who our friends are." Now, that's a pretty extraordinary statement. That also seems to imply to me that favours have been done and they're going to be returned once this guy is back in power, which of course he is. This is the Right Honourable James Arbuthnot, who's the parliamentary, or was the parliamentary chairman of CFI, may still be. CFI is one of the most important and successful groups in the party. So the average voter thinks they're dealing with the Tory party, but we're seeing that they're actually dealing with a totally different beast. William Hague, my involvement with and education by CFI has been extremely useful over many years. And this is the man who's now going overseas as Foreign Secretary, as if he's independent.
And banging the drums of war on Iran.
Absolutely. And here he is congratulating the Conservative Friends of Israel for educating him. We wonder how they educated him. Ian Duncan Smith, I think this is lovely. He says, Conservatives have always stood for the values that Israel stands for: freedom, positive achievement and the rule of law.
I'm not sure which planet he actually was on when he made that observation.
Well, I've only met Ian Duncan Smith once, and the man was barely awake. And I had a much more productive discussion with his PA.
With a plant?
No, with his PA, who was an extremely nice gentleman who was fully aware of what was going on in the country. Ian Duncan Smith is a very sleepy man, and is he brighter than Cameron? We could have a debate on that. But let's have a look at this, because this is a brilliant statement by the Right Honourable Michael Howard, QC, of course. When I look at all Israel has achieved in 56 years in the face of a struggle for her existence, I can only wonder at her achievement. Yet it is a global economic power with world-beating companies in the fields of medicine, technology, defence, pharmaceuticals and telecoms. This is an astonishing and incredible achievement. So he's pointing out that we have a very small country with immense power. They've done it all themselves. It's incredible. So I thought we'd just put up a few statistics of the aid which the US alone has poured into Israel since 1949.
Actually, there's a correlation with this number, by the way. The US gives to Israel every year its spend with Saudi Arabia on oil.
Right.
So whatever the US spends with Saudi Arabia on oil in that year, it gives to Israel as a gift.
Yeah, well, we're talking a vast sum of money, somewhere in the region of 123 billion US dollars.
And most of it is spent on US arms.
Indeed. So all we're saying here is, never mind Israel per se, we're asking serious questions of what our MPs are involved with. And as I've pointed out, this involves Labour.
I think we also have to make the observation, Brian, that many, many people in Israel are becoming increasingly disturbed about the agenda of the Zionist Israeli government. I mean, I think the Jewish communities, the Jewish community in the UK took out full-page advertisements in the quality press. I think it was 3 years ago now, basically letting it be known that they would not be browbeaten.
Not in our name.
Not in our name, exactly. Yeah. You know, and so what we have right now, and especially since the latest atrocities in Gaza, is that the Jewish communities all around the world are beginning to wake up and realise that the Zionist agenda is not in the best interests of the Jewish people.
Well, indeed, we can speak with some confidence on this programme in that we are being contacted by Jewish people as well,
exactly,
who are asking us whether we will cover some of these issues, so we're delighted to do that.
Well, the Jewish community, they're getting fed up with being labelled as self-hating Jews, which of course is the classic sort of put down. You know, if you're in America and you question the Zionist agenda, you're labelled as anti-Semitic. In Europe, you're labelled as a Holocaust denier. If you're Jewish, you're labelled as a self-hating Jew. And the Zionists play on this. Yeah. You know, they create this victim mentality. And fortunately, people are starting to see through it.
Well, with a couple of minutes to go, we'll just give a little bit more on this for people to think. Of course, Liam Fox here was the man disgraced over the dirty deals and meetings with Werity when there were no proper security clearances. So again, Liam Fox hasn't ended up in jail. He's still there swanning around Westminster. But a brilliant photograph, a man in his clean suit and tie, but what's he really doing? Dealing in death. And of course, it's quite interesting to see there's yet another layer of these connections, and this is BICOM, the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, and here's Fox in the right-hand picture. But we've also got Michael Gove, and we've got Baroness Margaret McDonough, tied up with some very, very interesting people, very powerful people. And Zabludovitz, who's with his wife in the top left-hand corner. Of course, this was a Finnish Israeli arms dealer who was giving money to help Cameron win his private leadership campaign. So when we are voting Conservative, which we don't do, but if one was to vote Conservative, of course, who are you really voting for? And
The same people as if you vote for Labour, actually.
indeed. We'll just really end on this. Of what is being created in this country at the moment is big society. This is part of a diagram from a UK column article, but the thing to remember is Tony Blair's creation of the third sector has now been transformed into big society by the Conservatives. It's the same agenda, and what effectively they are doing is blurring boundaries, acting outside authority to create this one-party dictatorship.
Absolutely.
If we can see it and expose it, we can deal with it.
We can.
Any last comments?
Brian, you know, it's been an amazing couple of hours. I can't believe that 2 hours has
it's
passed
gone.
and we've covered a lot of ground. I just hope that, as we said earlier, people will go away, take the information we shared with them, do their own research, and then share it as far and wide as they possibly can.
Brilliant. Check everything we've said yourselves and don't be frightened. Get out there, challenge the system. Let's clear out these terrible people and see whether we can bring some morality, honesty and love back to Britain in 2013. Thanks for joining us.
Bye now.
Bye.